The most dangerous doors are the ones you never realize you have already walked through. Emily Carter did not think anything had changed that night. Not really. Because from her perspective it was just another shift, another crowded room filled with people who would never remember her name, her hands steady out of habit, her smile practiced to survive. And when the party ended, she left the same way she always did, unnoticed, replaceable, already forgotten. But the next morning something was different, not loudly, not dramatically, just precisely wrong. There was a message on her phone offering a job she had never applied for, triple the pay, flexible hours, no interview, only an address. And for a moment she hesitated, just long enough for doubt to exist, but not long enough to matter. Because people like her did not question miracles, they accepted them. And that was the moment everything changed. The building stood 12 stories tall, glass reflecting light in a way that felt too clean, too perfect. And the moment she stepped inside, the air shifted, subtle but undeniable, cooler, quieter, like the outside world had been lowered to a distant memory. And Emily felt it immediately, that faint instinct telling her something was off. But she ignored it, because nothing looked wrong, nothing behaved wrong, and that made it worse. The receptionist smiled without blinking. The employees moved with quiet precision, every interaction smooth, effortless, rehearsed. And Emily told herself it was just professionalism, just a world she was not used to yet. But deep down something did not settle. Her first week passed too easily, her rent paid ahead of time without explanation, her schedule clearing itself, problems disappearing before she could face them. And each time she noticed it, she explained it away. Coincidence, luck, a break she finally deserved. But that was the mistake, because the moment she stopped questioning it, something else stopped hiding. And then she saw him again, standing at the far end of the hallway like he had always been. There, not arriving, not entering, simply existing, his presence still, controlled, absolute. And when his eyes met hers, something inside her went quiet. Not fear, not panic, just silence, like her world had paused to let his continue. And Emily looked away first, because something about him felt too certain, too intentional. But what she did not notice was that nothing in that building happened by accident anymore. Emily told herself not to think about him again. But once something breaks the pattern of your reality, it does not disappear, it lingers, waiting for you to notice it again. And over the next few days she did, not directly, not clearly, but in small ways that refused to align with logic. Conversations stopped a fraction too late. When she entered a room, reflections in the glass seemed slightly delayed. And the silence in the building was no longer empty. It felt observed. She tried to focus on her work, on the things she could control. But even that began to shift. Tasks completed before they became difficult, schedules adjusted without her asking, people treating her like she had always belonged there. And that was the problem. She had not earned this place. Not really. And that thought stayed with her longer than it should have. That was the moment doubt became something heavier. That night she tried calling her old coworker, the one person who would laugh and ground her back in reality. But the number did not connect, not even a voicemail, just a flat tone repeating. There was no record of that contact. And Emily froze, staring at her phone as if she had dialed it wrong. But she had not. She knew she had not. And that was when the unease finally took shape. The next morning she arrived earlier than usual, needing something familiar, something predictable. But the building greeted her the same way, controlled, quiet, unchanged, as if it existed outside the flow of time. And when the elevator doors opened, he was there again, closer this time, standing by the window like the city beyond it belonged to him. And Emily felt it immediately, that same stillness settling over her, that same quiet shift that made everything else feel less real. "You are adjusting quickly," he said, and the words should not have made sense, but they did, in a way she could not explain. And Emily frowned slightly, grounding herself. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she replied. But even as she said it, something inside her knew that was not true. He stepped closer, not threatening, not rushed, just inevitable. "No," he said quietly. "I do not confuse things that belong to me." And the words should have unsettled her. They should have pushed her back, but they did not. And that was the moment she realized something had already begun to change inside her. Emily should have walked away after that. She knew it in the part of her that still remembered what normal felt like. But something in his voice, in the way his presence seemed to reshape the moment around him, made everything else feel less certain, like reality itself had shifted slightly off-center, and only he remained unchanged. That thought stayed with her longer than it should have, and that was when everything began to tighten. The rest of the day passed too smoothly, too controlled, every detail aligning in ways that removed friction from her life. And at first it felt like relief, like she had finally caught a break. But the longer it continued, the more it felt arranged, and that changed everything. That evening she made a decision, small but deliberate. She would take a different route home, just to prove to herself she still could, just to remind herself she still had control, and for a while it worked. New streets, unfamiliar turns, the city feeling normal again. Until it did not. Within minutes, the noise faded too quickly, the lights aligned too cleanly. And when she finally stopped and looked up, her breath caught because she was standing in front of the same building again, the same glass, the same reflection, as if every path led back whether she chose it or not. That was the moment she knew it was not coincidence. That is not how this works, she said under her breath. But the words felt weak the moment they left her, because something deeper already understood the truth. No. A voice answered behind her, calm, certain. It is exactly how this works. And she did not need to turn to know it was him. Lucian stood there like he had been waiting, not following, not chasing, just present. And Emily felt it again, that stillness, that quiet alignment that made resistance feel unnecessary. I did not plan to come back here, she said. And for the first time, her voice carried something real, uncertainty, and Lucian's gaze did not waver. You did not have to, he replied, and the simplicity of that answer made it worse, because it meant something else had already decided for her. Emily did not remember stepping forward, but suddenly she was inside again, the doors closing behind her with a quiet finality that felt heavier than any lock. And for a moment she stood still, trying to hold on to something solid, something familiar. But even her thoughts felt slower now, softer, like the building itself was adjusting her pace. That was when she realized the real shift was not happening around her. It was happening within her. She moved without thinking, her steps echoing, lightly, each movement too smooth, too certain, and that absence of hesitation unsettled her more than anything else, because it meant she was no longer resisting the way she should have been. You feel it, Lucian said behind her, and she stopped, her hand brushing the wall, as if grounding herself. Feel what? She asked, but the question lacked conviction, because part of her already knew. The moment your world stopped being entirely yours, he said, and the words settled into her chest with a quiet weight that made everything else fade. Emily shook her head, forcing logic back into place. That is not possible, she said. But even as she spoke, the certainty was already slipping, and that was the moment her resistance began to break. Lucian stepped closer, not enough to threaten, just enough to narrow the space between them. You chose the door, he said, his voice low, controlled. But you did not choose what was waiting on the other side. And something about the way he said it made the memory surface again, clearer this time. The party, the moment she brushed past him, the brief contact she had ignored, and suddenly that moment did not feel random anymore. It felt deliberate. What happened that night? She asked, and her voice was quieter now, because she was no longer asking out of curiosity. She was asking because she needed to know what she had already stepped into. Emily held his gaze longer this time, not because she was unafraid, but because something inside her had begun to settle into a new kind of awareness, one that did not rely on denial anymore. And that shift changed the way everything felt. That does not explain anything, she said, but her voice no longer pushed against him. It aligned with the moment instead, and that was the problem. Lucian tilted his head slightly, studying her, not correcting, not interrupting, simply allowing the realization to unfold, and that silence carried more weight than any answer could have. You are asking the wrong question, he said, and Emily frowned, stepping forward without fully realizing it, closing the distance between them, because something in her needed clarity more than distance. Then what is the right question? She asked, and for a moment the space between them felt almost still, like the world had narrowed to that single exchange. Lucian's gaze did not waver, not what happened. He said quietly, but why you were able to step into it at all. And that was the moment everything shifted again, because the question was no longer external. It was about her. Emily hesitated, searching for something logical, something familiar, but nothing came, only fragments of memory that no longer felt random, and that changed everything. I did not choose that, she said, her voice softer now. And Lucian's expression shifted, not into disagreement, but into recognition. No, he said, calmly, you did not. And he stepped closer, the air around him cooling slightly, controlled, deliberate. That is why it matters, he continued, because not everyone can cross that line. And Emily felt it then, not fear, not confusion, but something far more unsettling, the quiet realization that whatever had begun that night had not been an accident at all. Emily felt the shift before she could understand it, not as a sound or a movement, but as something deeper, something that pressed quietly against her awareness until it became impossible to ignore, and that was the moment she knew something was wrong, not outside, but inside her, because she was not reacting the way she should have been. The air felt different, heavier, as if the building itself had taken a slow breath and was now watching her more closely, and Emily's first instinct was to step back, to create distance, to regain control, but her body did not follow that instinct fully, not anymore. And that hesitation, that tiny delay, was enough to unsettle her more than anything else. You feel it now, Lucian said quietly, and she turned toward him, her expression tightening just slightly. Because she wanted to deny it, she needed to deny it, but nothing inside her pushed hard enough to make that denial real. That was the problem. What is it? She asked, and her voice sounded calm. Too calm, like it belonged to someone else. And Lucian studied her for a moment before answering. Recognition, he said, and the word landed differently this time. Heavier, sharper, because now she understood what it implied. Not curiosity, not coincidence, but selection. Emily shook her head, forcing herself to focus. That does not make sense, she said. But even as she spoke, the resistance in her voice was already fading, dissolving into something quieter, something more uncertain. And that changed everything. Lucian stepped slightly aside, revealing the corridor stretching endlessly behind him, and for a split second, something moved at the far end, not a figure, not a shadow, but a distortion, like space itself had folded and then smoothed out again. Emily's breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition, because she had seen something like that before, just for a moment, at the party, when everything first shifted. Why me? She asked, and this time the question did not come from confusion. It came from acceptance beginning to take shape, and Lucian's gaze held hers with quiet certainty. That, he said, is the question you were not meant to ask yet. And somewhere deep within the building, something responded, as if it had been waiting for her to say it out loud. Emily felt it immediately after the words left her lips, a subtle change, not around her, but within her, like something had shifted into place the moment she stopped asking the wrong questions. And that was when she realized the truth she had been avoiding. She was not being forced into this. She was aligning with it. That thought should have scared her. It should have pushed her back, but it did not. And that was the moment everything changed. She took a slow breath, steady, controlled, and looked down the corridor again. But this time it did not feel unfamiliar. It felt expected, like she had already seen it in some forgotten memory. You said it recognizes me, she said, her voice quieter now, more precise. Then what happens if I refuse? And for the first time, Lucian did not answer immediately, and that silence carried weight, because it was not hesitation, it was confirmation. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, but something beneath it had hardened. It does not expect, he said. It identifies. And Emily felt something inside her settle at that. Not comfort, not fear, but certainty. Because identification could not be undone. She shook her head slightly, forcing herself to hold on to control. Then why does it feel like I cannot leave? She asked, and Lucian stepped closer, just enough to anchor the moment. You can, he said quietly, and for a split second, hope flickered, fragile and brief. But you will not, he added, and the hope disappeared just as quickly, not crushed, not taken, simply absent, like it had never fully existed. Emily turned slightly, catching her reflection in the glass, and for a fraction of a second, it did not move with her. It waited, just a beat too long. And that was when she understood, not logically, but instinctively. Something about her was already out of sync with the world she thought she belonged to. Then what happens next? She asked, and Lucian's gaze softened just slightly, something almost unreadable passing through it. That depends, he said, on how long it takes you to stop pretending this is not where you belong. And deep within the structure, something moved again, closer this time, as if it had taken one step toward her. Emily did not argue this time, not because she agreed, but because something inside her no longer reacted the way it used to. And that was the most dangerous part. Not the building, not Lucian, but the quiet absence of resistance that had once defined her, and she felt it clearly now. She was not losing control, she was letting go of it. That realization settled slowly, but once it did, it changed everything. She turned her gaze upward slightly, as if she could somehow see beyond the surface of the walls, and the silence around her shifted again, deeper, heavier, like something vast had acknowledged her awareness. And for the first time, she did not look away. "If I already belong here," she said, her voice calm, steady in a way that felt new, "then why does it feel like something is watching me?" And the moment the words left her lips, the air responded, not violently, not suddenly, but deliberately, like a system recognizing a command. Lucian did not move, but his gaze sharpened. "Because it is," he said, and there was no hesitation in his voice, no attempt to soften the truth, and that made it more real. Emily took a step forward this time, not back, and that single movement was enough to shift the balance of everything, because she was no longer resisting. "Then what is it?" she asked, and this time Lucian's silence lasted longer, long enough to feel intentional, long enough to matter, and when he answered, his voice was lower, quieter, carrying something heavier than before. "Not what you think," he said. "Not someone." He paused, just long enough. "Something." And that word changed everything, because something could not be reasoned with, could not be understood in human terms. It simply existed. Emily felt it then, not as fear, but as awareness expanding beyond what she had known before, and for a brief moment, something shifted at the far end of the corridor, not movement, not form, but presence, vast, patient, and waiting. She looked back at Lucian, her voice softer now, not from uncertainty, but from clarity, and it has always been. "Here," she said, and Lucian did not answer, because he did not need to. And as the lights dimmed once more, slower this time, Emily understood something that could not be undone. This was never just his world, and whatever was watching her had already decided she belonged to it. Emily stood very still, not because she was afraid, but because something deeper than fear had settled into her, a quiet understanding that moving too quickly, thinking too loudly, might somehow draw more attention from whatever it was that now existed just beyond her perception. And for the first time since stepping into this place, she realized the silence was not empty. It was full, layered with something vast and patient that did not need to reveal itself to be present. She lowered her gaze, slowly, grounding herself in the familiar lines of the floor beneath her feet. But even that felt different now, like the surface was not just supporting her, but acknowledging her, responding in ways she could not see. And the thought should have unsettled her more than it did, but instead it felt inevitable. "You knew," she said quietly, her voice steady, directed at Lucian without looking at him. "From the beginning." And he did not deny it, did not interrupt, allowing the realization to fully form on its own, which somehow made it more real, more final. "I knew enough," he replied after a moment, his tone calm, measured, as if this had always been part of a sequence she was only now catching up to. And Emily let out a slow breath, her mind tracing back through every moment. The party, the brief contact, the shift she had ignored, the opportunities that had appeared too perfectly, the way her old life had quietly unraveled without resistance, and none of it felt random anymore. She turned slightly then, meeting his gaze with something new in her eyes, not confusion, not fear, but clarity sharpened by acceptance. "Then you also knew I would ask," she said, and this time there was no hesitation in his answer. "Yes," he said simply, and the certainty in that single word settled everything into place. Emily nodded once, a small movement, but it carried the weight of a decision she did not fully understand yet. And as she looked past him, down the endless corridor that no longer felt unfamiliar, she realized something that shifted everything again. She was not trying to find a way out anymore. She was trying to understand how far this world extended, and that change, subtle as it was, felt like a line she had crossed without noticing. "So what happens if I stop resisting?" she asked, her voice quieter now, not from fear, but from the calm that comes when there is nothing left to deny. And Lucian stepped closer, just enough for his presence to anchor the moment completely, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Then it stops waiting," he said, his voice low, controlled, and as the words settled into the space between them, something deep within the structure shifted again, not distant this time, not subtle, but immediate, like a response triggered by her acceptance. And the lights above dimmed one final degree, the air growing still, precise, as if the entire place had reached a conclusion it had been moving toward all along. Emily did not step back, did not look away, and in that stillness, in that quiet alignment between her awareness and the unseen force surrounding her, she realized something that changed everything she thought she understood about choice, about control, about where her life had led her. Because she had not been pulled into this world without realizing it, she had been guided here, moment by moment, until there was no version of her left that would choose to leave, and somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the reach of light and reflection, whatever had been watching finally stilled, as if it no longer needed to.